In the dim light of the Fort Bragg archives room, Captain Sarah Brooks leaned over a battered manila folder, her fingers trembling as she lifted a photograph that should not exist. It was the kind of image that history tries to bury grainy, black and white, yet devastating in its clarity. Her grandmother, Lieutenant Helen Brooks, stood smiling beside three men in crisp German uniforms outside the remains of what looked like a bombed-out church. The photograph was dated November 1942. But Helen Brooks, according to military records and the shameful story passed down like a curse in Sarah's family, had died in October 1942, executed, branded a traitor, collaborator, erased. The photograph changed everything. Sarah stared at the smiling face in the picture, the same face hidden in the single-family portrait her father had never dared display. Helen's gaze in the photo was calm, composed, proud, not the look of a traitor facing her captors. Not the expression of someone held at gunpoint or coerced. It was the expression of someone who believed in what she was doing, Captain. Sarah Brooks had been a soldier for 8 years, a medical officer, trained in both healing and protocol, with access to archives most people didn't know existed. She had begun this research as part of her master's thesis in analysis of medical logistics during the Italian campaign. Just another academic exercise. But nothing felt academic now, not with that photo burning in her hands. "You finding what you need, Captain?" A voice broke her focus. Sergeant Murphy, lingering in the doorway. Sarah slipped the photo back into the folder, heart pounding. "Yes, just reviewing medical unit organizational charts from the Italian campaign." Murphy smiled and stepped away. "That stuff's gold. My grandfather fought at Anzio. Said it was the nurses that kept most of them alive." Sarah nodded, lips pressed tight. "The nurses were heroes," she said, her voice cold. "Not all of them," her mind whispered bitterly. At least, not according to the story she had been told her whole life. Her grandmother had been executed by the U.S. Army for collaborating with the enemy. She had disgraced the family. Her name was never spoken. In her father's house, her photos destroyed, her memory treated like a cancerous growth, to be cut out and never discussed.
Ow.
Now Helen Brooks looked a lot less like a traitor and far more like a ghost whose truth refused to stay buried. Later that evening, Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of her tiny apartment off base, the photograph scanned and stored on a secure drive, the original hidden in her locked filing cabinet. Spread out before her were the few family documents that had survived the fire of shame. Her grandfather's death certificate, her father's discharge papers from Korea, and a single, brittle letter, the one that had destroyed her great-grandmother's. "Hart, we regret to inform you that Lieutenant Helen Brooks was executed for collaboration with enemy forces in the Italian theater. Due to the nature of her actions, she will not be eligible for military honors or burial in a national cemetery." Sarah? Read it again, not because she needed to. She'd memorized every word the first time she found it. Hidden in a shoebox beneath a pile of old clothes after her father's funeral. She had never asked about Helen after that.
Her father wouldn't have answered.
He died with her name still, clenched behind his teeth, but the photo told a different story. She examined it again under her magnifying glass. The German uniforms were not standard issue, not field-worn, not even dusty. Their collars were immaculate, creases perfect. They looked like actors on a stage, dressed for a scene. The Red Cross armband on Helen's sleeve was clearly visible. She wasn't in disguise. She was in uniform. The words on the back, Monte Cassino region, November, 1942 HB with contacts. Contacts. Sarah's breath caught. Could HB mean Helen? Brooks. It had to. And if she had contacts if she was alive after her supposed execution, then the Army had lied. Or worse, she called the National Personnel Records Center the next morning. "This is Captain Sarah Brooks, U.S. Army Medical Corps," she said, trying to keep her voice even. "I need to request personnel files for a deceased relative, Lieutenant. Helen Brooks, served 1941 to 1942, 95th Evacuation Hospital. Died in Italy." The voice on the other end hesitated. "One moment, Captain." Sarah waited, watching the soldiers jog the morning trail outside her window, the Army going about its endless routine. "I'm sorry, ma'am," the voice returned. That file is sealed, classified by military intelligence. In 1943, we can't release any information without clearance from the Department of Defense. Sarah's spine straightened. Classified. She was a nurse. I understand. Can't say more. Can file a Freedom of Information Act request, but wartime intelligence files from that era are rarely.
Oh.
Sarah hung up. That night, she dreamed of her grandmother. Not as an old woman. Sarah had never known her that way. As the woman in the photograph. Smiling, standing proud. Surrounded by enemies who somehow weren't enemies at all. When she woke, she couldn't shake the dream more, the certainty that she had just brushed against something much bigger than her family. She needed more. Records, witnesses, proof. If the army wouldn't give her answers, she'd find them herself. She started with the local veterans of foreign wars post in Fayetteville. A smoke-heavy tavern lined with beer signs and battlefield flags. 3 elderly men sat at the bar, sipping brown liquor, swapping stories in tones equal parts reverence and regret. She approached slowly, manila envelope clutched in her hands. Excuse me, gentlemen. I'm looking for anyone who served in Italy. During World War II, with or near the 95th Evacuation Hospital, they stared. One man, wrinkled and sharped, despite his years, looked her up and down. You military? Captain Sarah Brooks, Fort Bragg Medical Corps? He leaned back. What you need with the 95th? She opened the envelope, placed the photograph gently on the bar. I'm trying to find out what happened to my grandmother. Gaze fell on the image, and something in his face changed. His jaw clenched, his glass dropped to the bar with a loud thunk. What's her name? Helen Brooks. His hands curled into fists. I knew of her. Sarah's heart skipped. You knew her? I said, I knew of her. He stood, grabbing his coat, and I got nothing to say about that woman. Please, Sarah called as he walked toward the door. I just want to understand. He turned. His voice was sharp. As a bayonet, what happened is your grandmother fed the Krauts information that got good men killed. You want to dig up that shame? Do it somewhere else. He pushed through the door, leaving Sarah standing in stunned silence. Back at her apartment, she stared again at the photograph. The man at the bar wasn't spouting secondhand gossip. He had felt something, personal, powerful, and dangerous. But if Helen had betrayed Allied positions, why was she pictured so casually with German soldiers? Why wasn't she in a prison or dead in a ditch? Why was her file classified? She started a list. A nurse wouldn't have a sealed file unless she wasn't just a nurse. Maybe she was something else. Something hidden beneath a uniform and a red crossband. A spy. Sarah knew she was moving fast. Letting emotions twist facts into conclusions, but her gut screamed it was possible, Helen. Wasn't executed for collaboration? That was the lie. The truth was buried deep. The photograph was just the first. Crack in a wall built of decades of silence, and Sarah Brooks was going to break it. The veteran's words echoed in Sarah's ears long after she left the VFW. She fed the Krauts information that got good men killed. He hadn't stuttered, hadn't hesitated. That kind of anger didn't come from rumor. It came from something. Lived, something felt. But that man was holding on to a story as incomplete and possibly as corrupted as the official one. Sarah was beginning to suspect that everyone who had ever heard of Helen Brooks either hated her, pitied her, or tried to forget her. Nobody, it seemed, had ever truly known her. The classified file proved it. Now she needed someone who had the access in the wilt to help her open a door the Army had long since locked shut. Dr. Elizabeth Chen, her former mentor at Walter Reed, wasn't military intelligence, but she knew how the system worked. She knew which stones to turn over and how to do it without attracting too much attention. Sarah called her that same night. I need a favor, Sarah said, her voice tight. There was a long pause. Are you in trouble? Chen's voice was calm but alert. She heard something Sarah hadn't said. I don't think so. Not yet. I found a file about my grandmother, Helen Brooks. Chen was quiet. The Army said she was executed for collaborating with the enemy. 1942, but I found a photo taken weeks after she supposedly died. With Germans, smiling, no restraints, she looked. Alive, Chen finished. Alive and calm, Sarah said, like she was doing her job. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Need access? Real access. Her file was sealed by military intelligence in 1943. That doesn't happen to nurses unless they were something more, Chen said. There was another pause, deeper this time. The kind that comes before someone decides whether or not to jump off a cliff. Sarah, files like that stay sealed for a reason. The people who put them under lock and key don't want them opened, ever, and some are still very much alive. I know. I think one of them might have already found me. Be careful. Oh, you don't dig up secrets like this without someone hearing the shovel. They spoke for another 10 minutes. Chen didn't promise anything, but she didn't refuse either, and that was enough for now. The following morning, Sarah returned to the Fort Bragg archives. She kept her steps measured, her body language relaxed. Routine officer. Routine research. No alarms. But now, everything she did had a hidden motive. She was building a list, names of people assigned to the 95th Evacuation Hospital. Deployment orders, transfers, reports that hadn't been flagged or marked suspicious. She copied every name she could find, not just the nurses, doctors, drivers, quartermasters. Anyone who might have known Helen Brooks. And tucked inside a report from October 1942, she found something strange. A field requisition for morphine, signed by L.T.H. Brooks. Dated November 6th, 1942, weeks after her execution. Sarah took a breath. This was no longer a theory. This was a crack in the facade. The Army hadn't just lied, they documented. Their lie, she scanned the report and uploaded it to her secure drive, then carefully replaced the folder. When she returned to her car, she did what her father had taught her as a child without knowing why it was important. She checked her rearview mirror, watched for a tail, looked for faces that appeared more than once. It felt absurd, paranoid, until it didn't. A black SUV pulled onto the same road, 2 cars back. Same SUV from the VFW. She hadn't seen the driver's face, but her gut told her it wasn't a coincidence. Sarah didn't go back to her apartment that night. She stayed at a motel outside town, paid in cash, parked out of camera view. She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, thinking of her grandmother's smile in that photo, the confidence in her posture, the ease of her presence among supposed enemies. Something else was bothering her too. The Germans in the photo hadn't looked like soldiers either. Their uniforms were pristine, their posture relaxed. No weapons, no war weariness in their eyes. Who were they? On Tuesday, she returned to the local library, the oldest one in Fayetteville. Civil War volumes lined the shelves. Old microfilm reels sat like relics in the corner. There she met a woman who would change everything. Her name was Mrs. Harris. Gray hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and eyes like a hawk. "You're the Army captain asking about Italy, right?" she said, approaching Sarah with a thin smile. "I am. We have a regular, Mr. Kowalski. Writes about medical units in the European theater. He's a bit private. But if anyone knows something about the 95th, it's him." "When does he come in?" "Today," she said. "In about 30 minutes. Sarah waited. She reviewed her questions.
Practiced her introduction.
And when the door finally creaked open and a thin man with a cane stepped in, she stood immediately. "Mr. Kowalski?" He paused, measured her. "Who's asking?" "Captain Sarah Brooks, U.S. Army Medical Corps." His expression didn't change. "What do you want?" "I'm looking into the 95th Evacuation Hospital. Specifically a nurse named Helen Brooks." Everything about him froze, his breath, his eyes. Even his grip on the cane. "She was my grandmother," Sarah said. A long silence. "Not here," he said. "Too many years. Denny's. 7 p.m. come alone." She arrived at 6:45. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and fried everything. He was already seated back to the wall, where he could see both the entrance and the exits. A man used to being hunted. "ID," he said without preamble. Sarah handed it over, studied it carefully, then slid it back. She really was your grandmother. Yes. You know what they said about her? I know they said she was a traitor, that she died for collaborating. With the enemy? And you believe that? Sarah reached into her coat. Placed the photograph on the table. He looked at it, and his face so carefully composed until now softened. She saved my life, he said quietly. Twice. Once from German artillery.
Oh.
Once from our own side. Sarah leaned forward. Tell me the truth. He took a sip of coffee. Helen Brooks wasn't a traitor. She was OSS Office of Strategic Services, spy, courier, field medic. She ran a network smuggling out Allied prisoners and intelligence from behind enemy lines. That photo, those aren't Germans, they're Americans, posing as Germans. Os. Mouth went dry. So she was working for us? She was feeding false medical intelligence to German contacts. Used her position in the field hospital as cover. Saved hundreds of lives. Then why did they tell her family she was executed? Because she was compromised. The Germans figured her out. So did someone on our side. Someone who sold her out. She was killed to cover it up. The army couldn't admit one of their own was involved, so they erased her. Sarah sat back. Her heart raced. Her mind tumbled over the implications. Who sold her out? Kowalski looked around the diner, then leaned in close. A man named Klaus Richter. German intelligence officer, switched sides, came to America after the war, changed his name. You know him now as Carl Brennan? Sarah froze. Brennan, she whispered, the businessman. Kowalski said, He's a butcher. He's been watching your family for decades. Making sure nobody asked the wrong questions. He killed my father, she whispered. My grandfather. Maybe, or maybe he just made sure they couldn't speak freely. Either way, he knows you're close. Be careful, Captain. He'll come for you next. That night, Sarah didn't return to her motel. She drove past her apartment, past the base. She didn't stop driving until she reached a backwoods rest stop 2 counties over. She sat in the car, doors locked, gun on the seat beside her. She stared at the photograph again, at Helen's eyes. The pride, the defiance. Her grandmother hadn't died a traitor. She'd died a hero. And now, Sarah had a name, a target. A man who had killed to keep his past, buried Carl Brennan. She would burn his world down. Sarah spent the night in her car, parked beneath a canopy of trees off a county road no GPS could find without help. The sun hadn't yet risen, and the world was still pinned in that eerie silence where even the birds hesitated to sing. She hadn't slept. Every time her eyes closed, they snapped open against chased by images of Helen's bloodied body, of Carl Brennan smiling while her father died alone in a hospital room, of secrets hidden in basements and burned in files. She had the photograph, Ched Kowalski's confirmation. She had a name. Now she needed proof. The next day, she returned to Fort Bragg in uniform, hair tight, boots polished, posture stiff. She played the part she'd trained to play, loyal, measured, clean. She requested temporary leave under the pretense of a family emergency, citing her late father's estate. It was approved by noon. She collected the files she'd hidden, the USBs, the maps of Italy, and archival records, then stashed them at a new motel on the outskirts of town. One with no cameras. One she paid for in cash, then she drove straight to the office of Dr. Elizabeth Chen. Chen's office at Walter Reed was lined with shelves of thick binders and military medical manuals. Behind her sat a window that overlooked nothing but concrete and a dead hedge. The building was old, secure, and importantly silent. You look like someone expecting to be shot at, Chen said, the moment Sarah walked in. I'm getting used to it. Chen gestured to the chair opposite her desk. Tell me everything, Sarah told her about the photo, the veteran's reaction, the sealed file, break-in, Kowalski, Brennan, all of it. Chen didn't interrupt. She just listened, is narrowing with every new detail at the end. She stood and closed the blinds. I can't officially help you, she said. Sarah didn't answer. But if I were to point you in the right direction, I'd suggest starting with the National Archives Restricted Records Division in St. Louis, Oz Files. You'll need a pretext. You're still writing your thesis? Yes? Yes. Then you're researching early intelligence medical coordination protocols. Say you're trying to understand how medical personnel were involved in covert operations. It's not technically a lie. What will I find? Maybe nothing, Chen said. But if Helen Brooks was OS, there'll be traces. It's ghost entries, discrepancies, personnel transfers that make no sense. And if Brennan sees me looking, you already know what comes next. Sarah was on a plane to St. Louis that evening. No luggage, no notifications, no paper trail. She moved like someone who had never wanted to be noticed, yet was now desperately trying to disappear. By morning, she was sitting in a government building that hadn't changed since 1963. Flanked by dusty file cabinets and tired security cameras, a man named Gerald met her in the research room. Early 50s. Pink shirt, the kind of man who had memorized declassification codes the way some people memorize Bible verses. Medical. Support for OSS, he said, adjusting his glasses. That's not an area we get much interest in. It's for a graduate thesis. Walter Reed authorized it. Of course, you'll want box group 3942. It's unclassified, but some records are redacted. Sarah nodded. She was used to redactions.
Oh.
Most of her family's history was a black bar on a white page. She spent 8 hours combing through boxes, file folders, and case logs. Most of it was procedural LIVAC plans, wounded recovery, burn treatment statistics. But near the bottom of the third box, she found something. An incomplete mission report. No heading. No signature. Just a date. November 3rd, 1942, in a line. HB confirms successful exfiltration of Allied wounded from Monte Cassino perimeter. Coordination with F unit executed. German operatives deceived. Local network secure. Sarah felt her breath stop. HB. There was no rank. Just initials enough to remain deniable, but clear enough for anyone watching closely. She flipped the page. More codes. More initials. A reference to someone called KR. Noted in ink as unconfirmed asset status potential double. Klaus. Richter. She scanned the document, took high-erase photos, and marked the location of the file box. By nightfall, she'd returned to her motel and found the door open. She froze. She hadn't been sloppy. She had changed motels, paid cash, taken every precaution. But the door was ajar. The smell inside was different, cleaner, artificial. She pulled her Beretta from her coat and moved quietly across the threshold. Her files were gone. All of them. The photograph, the USBs, the handwritten notes, even the Italian maps. The motel room had been sanitized. Professionally, she stood in the doorway for a full minute, then backed out and closed the door softly behind her. She didn't call the police. She didn't call the front desk. She called Kowalski. "They're watching you now," he said before she could speak. "You're too close. They took everything." "No, they didn't." "What, they didn't know where your real copies were?" Sarah blinked. "You think I made more?" "I know you did," he said. "You're your grandmother's blood. She never trusted anyone either." Sarah hung up, drove to a different county, sat in a coffee shop until dawn the next day. She checked one of the safe deposit boxes. She'd rented under a fake name. The originals were still there. Whoever had broken in had been thorough, but not thorough enough. It was time to go to the source, Brennan. Didn't call. She didn't write. She just showed up. His estate sat on a hill outside town, guarded by a gate, security cameras, and a private patrol. She wore her uniform. It made her look official. It made her presence harder to question when the intercom buzzed. She spoke calmly. "Captain Sarah Brooks. I'm here to speak with Mr. Brennan about a military donation." There was a pause. Then the gate opened. She was escorted to the house. Was offered tea by a woman in white gloves and seated in a drawing room filled with mahogany and silence. Brennan entered 10 minutes later. He looked older than he had in photographs, but his posture was still crisp, his movements controlled. His eyes scanned her like a document. "Captain Brooks," he said. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" Sarah stood, reached into her folder, placed a printed copy of the photograph on the table. He didn't flinch, not at first, but his eyes flicked to the photo, then to her, and back again. "I'm surprised you're still alive," he said softly. It was not a threat. It was regret. Sarah stared at him. "You've sold out your own people. You murdered a nurse, a spy, my grandmother. It protected an operation that saved thousands," he said. "She was going to undo all of it. She made her choice." "So did I. You killed my father. I silenced a problem," he said. "And now you're another." Sarah pulled her sidearm from her coat and laid it on the table, not aiming, not threatening. "Confess," she said. "Right now. Confess to everything." Brennan's eyes narrowed, and then he smiled. "Do you think this ends with me?" Sarah blinked. "There are people watching this house right now," Brennan continued. "And if I die here, they'll come for you. Your friends, your family. They've been waiting for me to slip. I've lasted 40 years. You think that happens by accident?" "I don't care how long you've lasted," Sarah said. "I care that you don't last one more day. Then we're done," he said. Standing, Sarah stood too. As she reached the door, she turned. "You're not the last one," she said. "No," Brennan said, smiling. "But I was the best." That night, Kowalski called again. "There's more," he said. "I found the decrypted version of Helen's final radio transmission. Her last message." Sarah held her breath. "I'll send it to you." To know she wasn't just naming names. She was naming Americans, officers. One still in power? What do I do with it? Finish what she started? The decrypted message sat in front of Sarah like a ghost with a pulse. It was Helen's voice, reduced to ink on a page, but alive in a way no history book had allowed. A transmission from 1942, sent in code, decrypted by a dying network, and buried under layers of government silence. Now, 40 years later, it was whispering again. "I've identified 3 American officers taking German payments. Evidence secured. Request immediate extraction. Networks compromised. They know about me. If I don't make contact in 48 hours, check. Swiss account number 847-239-1156. HBCRI read the message a dozen times. Her hands were cold, her stomach knotted. The implications were staggering. 3 American officers, taking German money. This wasn't just about Helen. This wasn't just a cover dash-up. This was treason. Sarah picked up her phone, fingers stiff from tension. She called Kowalski. "Did you find names?" "One's already dead. Colonel James Morrison. Kia, supposedly in Italy 2 weeks after Helen's death. But the bullet wounds didn't match field combat, and the others, Major Frank. Weber died in a car accident in 1947. Very clean. Too clean." Sarah's throat went dry. "And the third," Kowalski hesitated. "Captain Klaus Richter. Survived the war. Disappeared in 1945, reappeared in North Carolina in 1947. She didn't need to hear the rest. She already knew." Carl Brennan, Sarah sat back in her chair, the weight of everything crashing over her like a second war. "He's still alive," she said, "still moving money, still watching me." Kowalski's voice dropped. "He tortured me." The line went silent for a beat. "What?" "He found me last night. Came to my house, asked what I'd told you, what documents I had, and he made sure I wouldn't talk." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Are you?" "I'm still standing, barely. They didn't get what they were looking for. Because what matters is in here." Tapped his temple. "But he's getting nervous. It makes him dangerous." Sarah wanted to scream, to cry, to do something that would make her feel less helpless, less small, but all she could do was nod. "What do we do?" Kowalski didn't answer right away. Then finally, "We fight back." The cemetery was quiet that afternoon. Sarah arrived early, armed with a notepad, a USB copy of the transmission, and 2 sidearms, one in her jacket, one strapped to her ankle. She didn't trust the silence anymore. Silence was where things waited. Helen's grave sat in the back corner, hidden under leaves and time. The headstone was small, plain, It didn't mention her rank, her service, just her name. Helen Brooks, 1914 to 1942, beloved daughter, no honors. No flag. Just a marker left behind by people too ashamed to speak of her. Sarah knelt down, brushing the leaves away with care. I'm going to fix this, she whispered. I'm going to tell them who you really were. Behind her footsteps, she rose. Quickly, hand moving toward her jacket. Easy, Kowalski said, emerging from the path. In the daylight, he looked worse than before, pale, shaky. A white bandage wrapped around his left arm. Jesus, Sarah said. You weren't kidding. Didn't come to talk, just to warn. He sat down on a stone bench nearby, breathing like someone who'd walked too far on a broken leg. I've got the rest, he said. Richter's file, his entry into the U.S. under Operation Paperclip, his new identity. Carl Brennan, yeah. FBI knows. CIA knows. They all knew back then he gave them Soviet intel. They looked the other way. Sarah stared at the file in his hands. It's a final piece. The smoking gun. What's the plan? She asked. You've got access. Military clearance. You're his. Granddaughter, you bring this to the right people. Criminal Investigation Division. Intelligence oversight. You make noise loud enough, they can't bury it again. And if those people are already compromised, then you do it publicly. Leak it. The press, Congress, veterans groups make it impossible to cover up. Sarah looked at Helen's grave again. He's still getting paid, she said. The Swiss account is active. Want to know who else is sending money? Of contacts, Kowalski said. Banking Division, Zurich. I'll give you 3 names. Use the phrase, Helen's legacy. That'll open doors. Sarah nodded. What about you? Kowalski looked down at his trembling hands. I'm done. Last night proved I can't do this anymore. His voice cracked. But you can. Young, you're sharp. You're not carrying 40 years of survivor's guilt. Sarah's voice was low. You're a hero. He shook his head. I'm just someone who lived. Your grandmother. She was the hero. He stood slowly. Get. To Brennan before he gets to you? That night, Sarah sat alone in her car, staring at the Zurich account number 847-239-1156. She dialed the first contact. The line rang once, twice, then, Banking Division. This is Janet. I'm calling about Helen's legacy. Silence then. A new voicemail. Older, weathered. Who is this? A Captain Sarah Brooks. U.S. Army Medical Corps. Helen Brooks was my grandmother. A pause. Then, we've been waiting for this call for decades. They agreed to meet the next day. 3 p.m. Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. Washington, D.C., near the World War II exhibit, he would be wearing a red baseball cap. Sarah arrived early. She wore civilian clothes and a burner phone. Her sidearm rested against her lower back. She carried the photo, the transmission, and the file. She found him near a display of B-17 bombers. Thin, worn, but alert. He looked up as she approached. Captain Brooks? Yes. He motioned to a bench near the wall. We need to talk. His name was Frank Morrison, former OSS communications officer. Nephew of Colonel James Morrison. I decoded Helen's last message, he said. But by the time I got it to HQ, she was already dead. Sarah handed him the photograph. He studied it, then nodded. This was 3 days before her death. The men in uniform, those were also operatives. In disguise? They weren't German? No, American, British, and French. Part of a covert rescue of Allied prisoners. Then why did the Army say she was executed for collaboration? Frank's voice went tight, 'cause someone in OS was feeding information to the Germans, someone who sold her out. They had to make it look like she was the traitor. And that someone was Brennan. Richter, Frank corrected. He didn't become Brennan until 47. Paperclip covered it up. They brought him in as an asset, said his intel on Soviet movements was worth the blood. Sarah stared. Still being paid. I've traced the money, Frank said, handing her a flash drive. Swiss account activity. Names, routing paths, deposits. It's all there. Sarah held the drive like it was radioactive. What happens now? You go to SID? Or you go to Congress? Or you go public? But go soon. What about you? I'm too old to run, Frank said. But I've been waiting 40 years for this. If I go down telling the truth. Sarah stood. Then let's finish it, Frank smiled. You're more like her than you know. They split up outside the museum. Sarah took the metro. Frank headed for his hotel, but Sarah had a bad feeling, the way Frank looked around. The way he seemed to always be checking shadows. She was halfway home when her FOH buzzed. Unknown number. Frank won't be meeting you tonight. Stop looking for answers you won't like. Last warning. Sarah froze. They had Frank. They were watching her. Her grandmother had died for the truth. Her grandfather, casualties of a 40-year war fought in whispers and lies. Now, it was her turn not to die, to win. The message on her phone might as well have been written in blood. Frank won't be meeting you tonight. Stop looking for answers you won't like. Last warning. Sarah read it over and over, the letters searing themselves into her mind. Brennan wasn't bluffing. He'd already broken into her apartment. Tortured Kowalski. Found Frank, he was cutting off the last of the old witnesses, and she knew exactly why. The flash drive. Frank had given her hidden now in a different motel room under a false name, was loaded with 4 decades of buried truth, banking records, payment trails, names of U.S. officials who'd profited from treason, and details of an operation that had murdered her grandmother. To keep it all secret, Sarah wasn't just holding a damning record. She was holding a weapon, but Brennan wasn't going to wait for her to use it. He'd made the first move. Now it was her turn. She sat in her car outside Fort Bragg's Criminal Investigation Division the next morning, debating if this would be her last act in uniform. Part of her knew she should leak the flash drive, anonymously disappear, live under a new name. But the rest of her, the part born of Helen Brooks and sharpened by 8 years in the medical corps, knew that cowards didn't write history. They just buried it. Sarah walked into SID with her uniform pressed and her spine straight. She asked to speak with a senior officer about evidence relating to unresolved World War II intelligence crimes involving U.S. personnel. She was taken to an office on the 2nd floor and asked to wait. A few minutes later, a broad-shouldered man with salt and pepper hair stepped inside. Colonel Patterson, he said, offering a firm handshake. I understand you have information on a classified matter. I do. But I need to know this stays off the record until I say otherwise. He studied her. You've got 10 minutes. Then I decide who gets involved. Sarah took a deep breath. This is about a woman named Lieutenant Helen Brooks. Army nurse. OSS asset. Killed in 1942. The official report says she was executed for collaboration. That's a lie, go on. She uncovered a network of American officers selling intel to Nazi Germany. She reported it in her final transmission. 3 names. 2 died within a year. One survived and became someone else. And that person is? Sarah leaned in. Carl Brennan. But his eyes flicked to the door, then back to her. You have proof? I do. She handed him the flash drive. Banking records, Swiss account deposits, traced to post-war American corporations, 2 fronts used by former OSS, 1 still active, all connected to Brennan. Patterson turned the flash drive in his fingers, quiet. Then he said, You know this could unravel more than one career, right? That this doesn't stop at Brennan. I know, Sarah said. But I'm done watching my family die in silence. The Colonel's eyes locked onto hers. All right, Captain. I'll look into this. Discreetly. And I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Thank you, sir. He nodded. And Captain, keep your phone on. Sarah left SID with a strange mixture of hope and dread coiling in her gut. But it didn't last. That night, she checked into another motel under another fake name. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. A text. You should have taken the money. See you soon. Then another one. Seconds later. Hope your friend likes company. She froze. There was only one friend left Brennan could be talking about: Kowalski. By the time she reached Kowalski's house, the place was already torn apart. Lights smashed, books burned, drawers emptied. Sarah stepped through the wreckage, heart pounding. Kowalski. She called, no answer. She moved to the back, weapon drawn there. The old man sat slumped in a chair, breathing shallow. Blood soaked through the front of his shirt. Jesus, she dropped to her knees. You're okay, you're alive. His lips barely moved. They came for the safe. Sarah pressed a cloth to the wound. Don't talk. I've got you. Kowalski coughed. They found the names. They're cleaning house. Not if I get to them first. His eyes locked onto hers. Go to the cemetery. Helen's grave. Box underneath. Her real records. Then his hand went limp. Sarah checked his pulse. Still there, weak, but still there. She called emergency services anonymously, left the back door open. Then she drove fast to the Confederate cemetery. It was well past midnight when Sarah parked near the graveyard fence. She climbed over, flashlight in one hand, pistol in the other. Helen's grave was still there, still lonely. But now Sarah knew better. She dropped to her knees and began digging beneath the flat headstone. Her fingers numb with adrenaline, then dash metal, a small box. She pulled it free, opened it with trembling hands. Inside were old yellowing papers. A photo of Helen with OSHNs, dog tags, handwritten field notes in cryptic shorthand. And at the bottom an envelope. Sarah opened it. Inside was a note. If someone finds this, then they've started hunting again. The names you're looking for aren't just traitors, they're architects. Protectors of a lie that's lasted too long. Don't stop. Don't trust anyone. If you're reading this, you are the last chance to finish what I started. Helen Brooks blinked away the tears. She looked up at the sky. I won't stop. Back at her motel, she reviewed the documents. Names, maps, codes, all pieces of a larger story, the foundation Brennan had built his empire on. But there was one document that froze her blood cold. A classified OSS memorandum from November 1942. Subject: K Operation, Epitaph. Objective: transfer German intelligence asset KR to us for post-war strategic operations. Protection status: full. Cover story to be provided. Collateral must be eliminated. HB compromised. Mission termination authorized. They hadn't just let Klaus Richter in, they'd protected him, planned for it. He sacrificed anyone who stood in the way. Helen had tried to expose him, so they buried her. Now Brennan was using the same playbook, and Sarah. She was the new collateral. At 3:17 a.m., someone tried her door handle. A soft, deliberate click. Then another. Sarah was already standing in the dark, pistol raised. The lock turned. The door creaked open. She whispered, "Stop right there." Footsteps. Fast. She flung the door open. A man in black sprinted down the hall. She followed but didn't shoot. She wasn't going to kill a ghost in a hallway and give them another excuse to disappear her. She returned to the room. They hadn't taken anything. They had only wanted to see if she was still alive. The next day, her phone rang. Sid, Colonel Patterson. His voice was tight. "Captain Brooks, we need to talk, in person."
Ow!
Sarah stiffened. Why? Because we've confirmed the flash drive contents. Brennan's real identity. The payments, the operation, all of it. So what happens now? There was a pause. Then Patterson said something that chilled her to her core. You're about to make some very dangerous people very nervous. Be ready. Sarah arrived at Fort Bragg under the gray wash of an early morning fog, kind of fog that blurred everything, edges, memories, lines between truth and lie. She drove in silence, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the pistol on her thigh. There were no second chances anymore. She wasn't chasing ghosts. She was dragging them into the daylight. Colonel Patterson met her outside the CID building, flanked by two plainclothes officers whose eyes scanned every angle of the parking lot like they expected it to explode. "This way?" Patterson said. offering no small talk. Inside, Sarah was led past the front desk, through the heart of the operations wing, and into a conference room with no windows, a single table, and 3 folders already laid out like evidence at a trial. She sat without. Being asked, Patterson remained standing. His jaw was set tight, the way a man braces for the kind of conversation that can never be undone. "We verified the documents from the flash drive," he began. "Not all of them. Some were encrypted. Some led to Black Ops files we'll never fully access. But what we did confirm," he opened one folder and slid it to her. It was stamped OSD brief redacted and dated 1946. Was enough. Sarah flipped through it. Her grandmother's name was in the first paragraph. Brennan's was in the second, though listed as KR, and the word exfiltration appeared 3 times. "She was right," Sarah said. "Everything she reported was true." "More than that," Patterson replied. "Her death was ordered. The memo wasn't just a betrayal, it was a kill order, signed off by an OS section head who later became deputy director of the CIA." Sarah leaned back, staring at the ceiling. "So where does that leave us?" Patterson didn't answer immediately. He closed the folder slowly, carefully, like he was putting a loaded weapon away. "You have options," he said. "We could initiate a formal internal investigation. Quiet. Risky, but slow. Too slow." He nodded. "There's another option. I'm listening. We leak it, officially, through a retired Army general. Let him be the mouthpiece. He'll hold a press conference. Release the records. Frame it as correcting a historical injustice, honoring your grandmother, that draws public attention, civilian oversight. Congress, enough pressure, and we have to open an investigation." Sarah processed that. It won't stick unless someone's there to hold their feet to the fire, she said. Patterson offered the thinnest of smiles. "Captain Brooks, would you like to testify before a closed panel?" The invitation to Washington came 2 days later. Sarah arrived in a plain black suit, her Army ID tucked in a worn leather wallet. She was escorted past Capitol Police, through metal detectors, and into a chamber where 10 men and women sat behind microphones and sealed laptops. The chairman was a woman in her 50s, former Navy. Her eyes were tired but sharp. "Captain Brooks," she said, "this is an intelligence review panel. Everything you say is off record unless you choose otherwise, I understand. What would you like to share?" Sarah didn't read a prepared statement. She didn't fumble or flinch. She spoke. Clearly, calmly, like a soldier delivering a medical report under fire, she told them about the OSS program, about Brennan, about her grandmother's real mission, the photograph, the file, Swiss account, the 3 officers, the payments, the deaths, the lies she told them about the break-ins, the threats, the message on her phone. "You should have taken the money." She ended with the quote from Helen's note. "If you're reading this, you are the last chance to finish what I started." Silence followed. The chairman leaned forward. "Captain, are you prepared for the consequences of what you're saying?" Sarah stared at her. "I was born into the consequences. I'm just the first one who decided not to die quietly." That night, the press release hit national news. Army nurse cleared of treason. Charges 83 years later. Investigation uncovers OSS spy mission and cover-up. It spread fast online, on cable news, through veterans forums and military networks. Next morning, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was Brennan. Private number. No caller ID. She let it ring, then picked up. "I warned you," he said. "I gave you chances. And I buried you," she said. "You think this ends with a press release?" "No," Sarah replied. "It ends with you in prison, or in hell, whichever comes first." Silence on the line. Then he said, "You're not the first to come after me. I'll be the last." 2 days later, Sid raided Brennan's estate. They found hard drives, hidden documents, Swiss transfer records, 2 forged passports, and a burner phone with messages linking him to the threats against Sarah and Kowalski. He was arrested without incident. But his trial would be anything but quiet. Sarah was scheduled to testify, so was Frank Morrison. But just days before the trial began, Morrison was found dead in his hotel room. No sign of struggle, no forced entry, just a note on the desk. She deserves the truth. I won't run from it anymore. Sarah knew it wasn't suicide. She stood at his funeral with her, shoulders back and her hand on her heart. And she swore in that she wouldn't stop until every last piece of the truth was pulled from the ground. When the trial began, Brennan was defiant. He called it a political witch hunt, claimed he was acting under orders, called Sarah a disgrace to the uniform in front of reporters. But the evidence spoke louder. The banking records, the flight logs, the decrypted memos, and the tape. Yes, the tape, buried in the Swiss bank's safety deposit box accessed, with the number from Helen's final message. It was a reel-to-reel audio recording. Helen Brooks' voice. Clear, confident, and devastating. They'll say I turned. They'll say I betrayed the flag. But the truth is simple. I served. I bled. And I refuse to let monsters wear our uniform. If this recording survives, it means someone is still listening. Good. Don't stop. Don't forgive. Don't forget. The jury took less than 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. At the ceremony held in Helen's honor 6 months later, Sarah stood before a packed crowd of soldiers, veterans, and family. The sun burned high over Arlington. A new headstone had been placed. Helen Brooks, 1st Lieutenant, U.S. Army, OS 1914 to 1942, executed in service of truth. Honor restored as the bugle played and the flag was folded. Sarah stepped forward with the final item, the photograph, the one that had started it all. She tucked it into the flag case and whispered, "You're not forgotten anymore." The moment Brennan's sentence was read aloud, life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The courtroom exhaled as though it had been holding its breath for decades. But for Sarah, there was no relief. Not really. Brennan had been the executioner. But someone else had handed him the weapon. She knew it. The media had painted it as closure. Justice at last. Even the Army's official statement, delivered with solemn dignity by a brigadier general, spoke of bringing light to a chapter long buried. There were parades, interviews, documentaries in the works. They called her a whistleblower, a patriot, a descendant of a hero. But Sarah knew the story wasn't finished. Because Brennan hadn't acted alone, and he'd never named who had. 2 weeks after the sentencing, Sarah returned to the Army archives in D.C., this time not under a false pretext or forged request. This time she was invited. She met with the Army's historical division in a private review room where the declassified OSS files were being processed for public release. It was meant to be symbolic, healing. But Sarah wasn't there for symbolism. She was there for the rockdums, pages blacked out under the seal of national security. But now that Brennan had been convicted, and new congressional interest had exploded around the legacy of Cold War intelligence programs, cracks were starting to form in the wall of secrecy. That's how she found the name. Buried in an OSS logistics memo from 1943. Not in the body text, no. That would have been too obvious. It was scribbled in the margin, barely legible beneath the words. HB compromised. Termination request approved by R, a small circle, like a bullet point, followed by a single name in hasty ink. Halvorsen. Sarah's heart stopped. She'd heard the name before. General Halvorsen, retired Army Intelligence Director. Celebrated. Decorated advisor to presidents. Still alive, 80-8 years old, living in Virginia. Protected by reputation and legacy. He was the man behind the curtain. The one who'd ordered Helen's death. She debated it for a full day. Should she confront him? Could she? He'd never be tried. It's too old, too insulated. Even if she could prove it, his death would be cleaned up and buried beneath medals and state funerals. That's how these men survived. Outlived consequence. But Sarah didn't want revenge. She wanted a confession. And she was willing to look him in the eye to get it. She drove to Halvorsen's estate on a rainy Thursday, through long stretches of pine forest and private property signs. The kind of place where people didn't knock uninvited. She wore civilian clothes. No press badge. No Army insignia. Just Helen's dog tags around her neck, tucked beneath her shirt. A caretaker opened the door. Younger man, pale eyes, clearly. Military at some point, his posture gave it away. "I'm here to speak with General Halvorsen," Sarah said. He started to close the door. "I'm the granddaughter of Helen Brooks." That froze him. He left without another word. 10 minutes later, he returned. "He'll see you." Halvorsen was seated in a habacked chair by the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket. His face was sunken with age, but his eyes were razor-sharp. There was no confusion, no failing mind. "Captain Brooks," he said, his voice calm. "Or should I say, Avenger?" "I'm not here for revenge," she replied. "I want answers." "And if I give them, what then?" "You tell your story." "To another podcast? Another book deal?" "No. I write her story, Helen's, the real one. The one she died for. But I won't do it unless I know the truth. From you." Halvorsen gestured to the chair opposite him. Sarah sat. She was a liability, he said. Bright, brave, but reckless. She didn't understand what was at stake. "You mean war crimes? I mean the war itself?" Germany was falling, but the Soviets were rising. The OSS had to pivot. We needed assets. Richter Brennan was worth 10 Helens. We made a choice. She was trying to protect American lives. She was trying to protect her version of America, Halvorsen said. Not the one we needed. It's not the one that could win a Cold War. Stared at him. "You authorized her execution? Authorized the containment of a breach?" "We thought it would be clean. But she wouldn't go quietly. She was a nurse. She was a spy." He didn't flinch, didn't apologize. "She left a recording," Sarah said softly. "A confession. She exposed you." "I know," he replied. "Now you've exposed me." He looked at the fire for a long moment. Then, to her shock, he smiled. "Good. What?" "I knew someone would come one day. I just didn't expect it to be you." Sarah's breath caught. "You knew my father. He came to me in 1979. Asked questions. I warned him. He backed off. And later he got sick. Never said a word again. You threatened him. Saved his life," Halvorsen said. "And I left you alone. You were never meant to carry this, but you did." He gestured toward the mantel. A frame sat there. A younger Halvorsen. A group of men. And shockingly Helen. "I didn't hate her," he said. "I respected her. She made her choice. So did I. So what now?" Sarah asked. "Do you die with secrets?" "No," he said. "You came for the truth. You've earned it." He opened a drawer beside him and handed her a file. The Real Operation Epitaph. Sarah took it, opened it. Side were mission logs, authorization memos, the full kill order. All of it. "If you give this to the press, history will crucify." "Me," Halvorsen said. "I don't care." He nodded. "I didn't think you would." That night, Sarah sat in her car outside the estate for a long time. She didn't call a reporter. She didn't post the files. Online, she just stared at Helen's dog tags in her hand and whispered, "I got it, Graham. I got it all." 3 months later, her article was published in The Atlantic. It wasn't a scandal piece. It was a reckoning. The price of silence. How one nurse defied a war machine and paid. With her life, it didn't name Halvorsen. It didn't have to. The truth was all there unmistakable. Brennan died in prison weeks later. Heart failure, no visitors, No mourners, no legacy. Helen's story, meanwhile, made history textbooks, high school curriculums, congressional speeches. They gave her a posthumous Medal of Honor. Sarah accepted it in uniform, standing before a silent crowd at the Pentagon. She didn't die for nothing, she said. She died because she told the truth. And now, we remember her not as a traitor, but as a patriot. They called it a victory. Headlines celebrated her. Journalists quoted her. Senators stood in front of microphones and declared the restoration of a forgotten hero's honor. Helen Brooks had finally been recognized for what she was: a patriot, a nurse, a spy, and a martyr. Her face now hung in the Hall of Honor at the Army Medical Museum. Bronze letters beneath her photo read, "She saved lives in silence. She told the truth when it cost everything. She never stopped fighting." But Sarah knew better. Victories in politics and history were never clean, rarely final. For every medal Helen was awarded, a whisper followed. For every tribute, a backroom meeting was held to decide who might be named next and who needed protection. It hadn't taken long for Helen's resurrection to become a political weapon. One party claimed her as a symbol of American values, truth, sacrifice, the courage to defy authority. The other warned of revisionist history and the dangers of tearing down national legends. Military blogs speculated she hadn't acted alone. Internet sleuths tried to debunk her story. Some even claimed she was never in Italy. Sarah was used to battlefield wounds, but this was different. This was war by implication, a campaign to water down Helen's truth until it was nothing more than trivia. And Sarah wasn't going to let that happen. She refused every book deal, turned down every late-night show, nor a lucrative offer to consult on a movie script that wanted to turn Helen's story into a romantic thriller instead. She went back to Walter Reed quietly. She resumed work as a trauma physician, though it didn't feel like resuming. It felt like surviving. Her reputation, already under the microscope, attracted sideways glances and hesitant respect. She was both admired and distrusted, revered and feared. One colonel even told her, half joking, "You're not the kind of person people want asking too many questions." She smiled. "I don't ask them, I answer them." It was in the middle of a night shift in April when she was called into a private room. A man waited for her mid-40s, thin suit, State Department badge. He introduced himself only as Daniels. "I'm not here officially," he said, handing her an envelope. She opened it. Inside was a satellite image of a secure compound in Argentina. "Why are you showing me this?" she asked. "Because we intercepted a wire transfer to a subsidiary. Account linked to the same Swiss network Brennan used. Someone's still moving money, and it didn't stop after his death." Sarah frowned. "What does that mean?" "It means he may not have been the last." Daniels leaned forward. "You opened a door?" "Captain Brooks. And some very old shadows are now trying to close it." She waited. "There's a possibility," he said carefully, "that a second intelligence ring operated independently in South America after 1945. Same architects, same playbook. And the nurse who exposed them is dead. But her granddaughter isn't," Daniels said. "And you're already too far in to walk away now." He slid a sealed folder across the table. "Unofficially," he said, "we'd like your help. No uniform, no orders, just you. And if I say no," he gave a thin smile, "then someone else will say yes. But you won't like who." Sarah opened the folder. Inside, names, code names, locations, and one photo. Grainy, old, but unmistakable. Helen Brooks, standing beside a woman in nurse fatigues, blonde, younger, similar uniform. But the caption said, "Unknown, possible alias. Moran Richter." Sarah's stomach flipped. "Richter, Brennan's family. You think he had a daughter?"
Yes.
She asked. "We think he had an accomplice," Daniels said. "One who vanished in 1961, resurfaced twice. Same features, same signature. She may have continued his work or dismantled it. We don't know." "Why me?" "'Cause you're the only person she might come out for." Sarah closed the file. A second silence followed. Then she stood. Think about it. You don't have long. He left without another word. Back home. Sarah dug through everything she had: Helen's notes, old photos, declassified memos. Maren Richter appeared only once before in a photo taken in 1943, supposedly outside a clinic in Prague. The records were inconclusive, but the resemblance, it was uncanny. Blonde, blue-eyed, same height, same gait. And if Helen had worked with her, if she'd trained her, then maybe the truth Helen died to protect wasn't buried. Maybe it had been passed on. Sarah sat at her desk, staring at the photo, her finger tracing the edge. She wasn't done. She had wanted justice. Now she had a legacy, and maybe a war that still needed fighting. Sarah hadn't packed much. She'd learned long ago that truth seekers don't get to carry comfort. She brought a single duffel passport, burner phone, compact medical kit, 2 encrypted flash drives, a Glock 19, and Helen's dog tags. Daniels hadn't followed up after their first meeting. That was intentional. There was no paper trail, no mission briefing, no official sanction. This wasn't espionage. It was deniable curiosity wrapped in silence. The folder he'd left her included 2 names, 4 coordinates, and 1 face. Maren Richter, alleged daughter of Klaus Richter alias Karl Brennan. Helen's final days had been spent unraveling her father's betrayal, but now Sarah was chasing his daughter. If Maren was alive, if she had continued Brennan's legacy, or worse, if she had turned against it, then everything Helen had fought to expose might not have ended in a North Carolina courtroom. It may have just mutated. Location 1, Mendoza, Argentina. The foothills were quiet. Dry, wind-swept vineyards clung to the hills like scars. Sarah moved through the streets of the town like a ghost, her Spanish fluent but not local. She posed as a medical volunteer working with veterans and easy cover, made more believable by the credentials she carried. Her contact in Mendoza was a retired British field officer named Thomas Gray. He lived in an adobe house on the edge of town filled with old maps and unopened wine bottles. He greeted her at the door with a quiet nod. I always knew someone would come for her one day. Sarah stepped inside. You knew Maren? I knew of her, he said. Worked with her once. Back in '68, Bolivia. I was cis. She was unofficial. What was she doing? Intercepting exfiltration routes? German scientists fleeing. To Brazil. Some she'd let go. Some she'd buried in the jungle. She was hunting them. Or protecting them. Depends who you ask. We handed her a war notebook. This belonged to one of her runners. She passed through Mendoza 3 years ago. Used the name Eva Bauer. Quiet, efficient, never stayed more than 2 nights in any city. Sarah flipped through the notebook. Coordinates, pseudonyms. A symbol repeated over and over, an 8-pointed star within a circle. What is this? The seal of the Axis Reclamation, Gray said. A post-war myth. Rumors of a last-ditch plan by Nazi intelligence to embed assets across continents. Some say it never existed. Others say it still exists. Sarah didn't believe in myths, but she knew the damage real secrets could do. Where did she go next? Gray tapped a map pinned to the wall. A red mark circled a section of the jungle near Itapu on the Paraguay-Brazil border. Off-grid. Old safe house once used by Mossad. Now, who knows? Sarah closed the notebook. I'll find her. Gray studied her carefully. If she doesn't want to be found. Sarah's eyes were hard. Then I'll make sure she knows I'm not. My grandmother. Kayshanar. Itapu heat smothered the jungle like a wet shroud. Sarah moved with calculated patience, her steps quiet, the underbrush barely crunching underfoot. She was following the coordinates left in the notebook, ones only someone trained would recognize. They weren't GPS numbers, were elevation, slope, distance triangulated by topographic habit. OSS habits. Just like Helen's, she reached. The site by nightfall? A single-story concrete structure, hidden by vines surrounded by silence. No lights, no movement. She waited, watched at 0200 hours. Someone stepped outside, small frame, blonde, rifle in hand. Sarah exhaled slowly. Marin Richter. She approached the house at dawn, hands visible, voice low. I'm not here to hurt you. The door opened before she knocked. Marin was older than in the photograph. Early 70s, maybe? But her eyes, those eyes were young, alert, cold. I thought it might be you, she said, her accent unplaceable. You look like her. You're Sarah. Didn't answer. They stood facing each other for a long, tense moment. Then Marin stepped aside. Come in. The interior was Spartan. Tactical gear, water filtration, satellite radio with wires spilling across the floor. On the far wall, an old corkboard pinned with photos, clippings, and hand-drawn maps of Europe, South America, and Southeast Asia. Sarah's eyes caught one photo in particular, Helen Brooks, smiling, standing beside a teenage Marin. Where was this taken? Sarah asked. Marin sat. Switzerland, 1952. That's not possible. Helen died in 1942. No, Marin said. She disappeared in 1942, but she didn't die. Sarah's pulse spiked. That's not what the photos showed. Brennan staged her execution, Marin said. He needed it to look real. She was wounded, left for dead. But she got out. You're saying Helen survived? Until 1957, Marin said. She raised me, trained me, hid me from my father. Sarah staggered back, the floor shifting under her. Why would Brennan fake her death? He ordered it, and when it came, he saw the wrong body, or chose to. Marin slid a faded journal across the table. Helen's handwriting. The pages were filled with coded analysis, safe house blueprints, and a single phrase repeated over and over. Truth can't be buried forever. She kept fighting. Sarah whispered. She never stopped, Moran said. Neither did I. But why vanish? Because exposing the truth wasn't enough. She wanted to destroy the machine that let it happen. That machine still exists. Sarah's hands were shaking. You knew this the whole time, and you let them give her a funeral. I let them give her peace, Marin said. That Brennan's gone, others will surface. Its network didn't die. It adapted. Sarah met her eyes. So what do? Marin's voice dropped. We finish it. All of it. The next day, Sarah left with copies of Helen's second journal, a map of surviving OSA's safe houses, and a new mission to dismantle what her grandmother had only just begun to uncover, a global machine of betrayal. Built during war, protected by silence, and still breathing behind diplomatic curtains and military seals, Helen had called it epitaph. Marin called it resurgence. Sarah would call it what it truly was, a lie wearing a flag. Snow fell on Zurich like ashes, soft and silent. Sarah stood on the rooftop of a decommissioned safe house 5 blocks from Paradeplitz, the financial heart of a city that had, for decades, quietly enabled secrets to thrive. Below her, banks stood, like monoliths, faceless, fortified, untouchable. Beside her, Marin loaded the final clip into a sleek, matte black sidearm. This isn't revenge, Sarah said. Marin didn't look up. No, it's accounting. In the days since Itapu, everything had changed. Helen's second journal preserved in wax and hidden under an abandoned airstrip had revealed the final truth. Brennan was never the top of the pyramid. He had reported to a cell-closed loop of financiers, intelligence brokers, and post-war operatives who had seeded global institutions with people trained to hide truths, not expose them. They weren't spies anymore. They were architects, and they still existed. Their first target was a man named Johann Dietrich X-OSS asset turned banker. Retired in theory, but his name still appeared coded, buried in financial logs Marin traced through Helen's notes. He had helped build the network that laundered wartime treason into post-war profit, and he was still pulling strings from a penthouse suite above BAHNHOFSTRASSE. Sarah and Marin tracked his movements. His routine was precise: morning cafe, afternoon car service, Thursdays at a private club for former diplomatic attaches. They didn't need to kill him. They just needed him to talk. To name the others, to confirm the truth. It took 3 days. To intercept him, disguised as embassy personnel. They met him in an elevator at the Grand Metropole. He smiled at first, till he saw until he saw Helen in her. His face drained of color. "Miss Richter," he said softly. "I always wondered which of you would come first." Moran didn't speak. Sarah stepped forward. "You funded the operation that murdered my grandmother?" "I funded many things," he replied. "But you remember that one." "I remember," he said. "Because she told me she would send someone. And now we're here." He sighed, more tired than afraid. "I suppose this is justice." "No," Sarah said. "Justice comes next." They escorted him out through the garage. No cameras. No trace. He talked for 6 hours. Named 8 people. 3 were dead. 2 were in hiding. One, Sebastian Clairville, former NATO liaison, is now CEO of a transatlantic defense contractor, was due to speak at a conference in Geneva in 2 weeks. Dietrich died in his sleep the next morning. Heart failure, the papers said. Sarah knew better. He had seen the ghost of Helen Brooks and followed her into silence. Geneva. The conference was cloaked in steel and security surveillance drones. Armed private teams, encrypted comms. Clairville was there to speak about security futures. A buzzword-laden phrase masking 70 years of quietly managing conflicts to benefit industries no one admitted existed. Sarah registered under an assumed name. Marin infiltrated the catering team. At 14:17, they slipped into a private stairwell beside the conference stage. Sarah held a recorder. The one Helen had used in 1956, the last year she'd been alive. Moran had restored it. They'd tested it. Now it would deliver Helen's voice to the one man still alive who had helped orchestrate her execution at 14:30. Clairville entered the room. He looked older than his photos. But his posture was perfect. Military. Cold. He didn't recognize Sarah until she pressed play. Helen's voice echoed through the room. "If you're hearing this, then you're still afraid of me." "Good. You should be. Because you can't. Bury every lie. Some of us stay underground just long enough to learn how to dig back up." Clairville froze, then turned and saw Marin. His lips moved. "One word, Helen?" "No," Marin said. "I'm the part you didn't kill." Sarah stepped forward. "We don't want your confession. We want your silence broken." Clairville was silent for a moment. Then, "You don't understand how deep this goes." "I don't care," Sarah replied. "The truth bleeds, but it never drowns." 3 days later, a document dropped on every major investigative news outlet. In the world, a coordinated release. The recordings. The names. The money trails. The false deaths. The cover-ups. The memo authorizing Helen Brooks' assassination. Not anonymous. Signed, Captain Sarah Brooks. U.S. Army Moran Richter, independent witness. Fallout was seismic. Clerval was subpoenaed by The Hague. Retired generals went underground. A handful. Financial executives vanished, but none of it was enough to undo the harm. It was just enough to change the story. Helen Brooks was no longer a footnote. She was a reckoning. 2 months later, Arlington National Cemetery, the sun hung low over rows of marble. Sarah stood alone at Helen's grave, holding a single newspaper. The headline: CIA admits decades-long protection of Nazi intelligence asset. Investigation ongoing. At the bottom of the article, a photo of Helen, arms crossed, fire in her eyes. Sarah knelt, placed the paper at the foot of the headstone. "They know now." She paused, smiling softly. "But I think you already did." Elsewhere, in a quiet apartment in Portugal, Marin opened a sealed envelope from an old P.O. box registered in 1985. Inside was one final page from Helen's journal. A note: "To whoever is left, truth is never safe. That's not its job. Its job is to survive. I didn't die for what I knew. I died for what I refused to forget. So if you found this, keep going. If you ever think it's finished, it's not." Epilogue: years later, Sarah would return to Zurich. Not for war, for peace. She'd walk through the streets with her daughter, Helen Sarah Brooks, and tell her stories of a woman who saved the world by refusing to obey it. And in a bookstore on the edge of the old city, she would place a single worn photograph on a shelf. Helen, Marin, Sarah. 3 women, 3 generations. And beneath it, a handwritten card. The forgotten spy now remembered.